In this video clip, we're going to focus in on other non-cellular infectious agents, and we're really going to be focusing in on a type of non-cellular infectious agent known as a prion. Okay, so these are not going to be viruses. They're not any sort of living organism. Prions are something completely different. And you've heard of a prion disease before because mad cow disease is actually caused by prions. All right, so what are prions? Prions are infectious proteins. So at first that might not sound too unusual, but let's think about it. A protein is just an organic molecule. It's not a living thing. It has no ability under normal circumstances to replicate itself. So how could a protein be infectious? Because when you say something is infectious, it is capable of entering the body, causing some sort of harm in the body, but then it also has to be able to exit the body and spread somewhere else. So because of that, we have to assume that it's able to build up its numbers so you have enough of it around to spread elsewhere. So these prions are very unusual in that they are proteins that have a mechanism for increasing their numbers in order to wind up being spread to other hosts. So prion illnesses include the disease called mad cow disease, which is a more clinical term for that is scrapie, and then but prion diseases in general are called spongiform encephalopathies. So encephalo referring to the head or the brain area, and then encephalopathies implies a pathology, a disease state. Spongiform sounds like sponge. And so what happens in spongiform encephalopathies due to these prion proteins, neurons in the brain die. So what you see right over here is, this is a microscopic image of some brain tissue from a patient with spongiform encephalopathy. And so it's from the brain, so there are lots of neurons in the brain. And in pink, that's where you're seeing live tissue. All the white spots there are places where neurons used to exist in the tissue and they've died and now they're gone, so they're not taking up any dye in that location. So if you become infected with prions, your brain over time takes on a spongy consistency as neurons die and leave spaces within the brain tissue. So these are very unusual. There's no genome, no RNA or DNA genome. And when these were first discovered, there was a lot of controversy about this. Nobody believed that just a protein molecule could be responsible for such a severe type of disease. So as it turns out, what are these prion proteins? They're actually derived from normal cellular proteins that exist in neurons in the central nervous system of mammals. Their normal functions, we still don't really know what they do. And the prion form is a mutated form. So it's a protein. So there's a gene that's coding for that protein. There's a mutation in the gene that causes the normal neuron protein to take on a misfolded form, and that's the prion. And then the weird thing about prions is, and this is how they actually are able to spread, the protein, the prion version, is able to act as an enzyme and convert the normal version over to a prion version. So here's kind of a simple way of looking at that. I'm skipping over a slide. If this is our normal neuron protein doing whatever its job is in a neuron, as far as I know, that's still not well understood. The prion version is a mutated form of this. It's misfolded and it can act as an enzyme. So when it encounters other normal versions of the protein, it can convert them over to the prion form. And then these guys can go find more of these on your neurons and convert them over to the prion form. And then it can spread from neuron to neuron to neuron. And these misfolded versions of the protein also accumulate inside the neurons. That's what we're seeing over here. And eventually the neuron can't process them. They accumulate inside the neuron, and the neuron winds up dying. That's what they're showing you here. This is a depiction from an article in a newspaper article from a long time ago, but this is supposed to be a neuron. The little green spots are the normal version of the neuron protein sitting there on the surface. The orange versions are the prion version, the mutant version, and the orange versions, when they encounter green ones, can convert them over to orange versions, and those misfolded versions accumulate inside the neurons and eventually will kill them. So very strange. So what happens with, the reason why there's always a lot of concern about cattle that might have mad cow disease is if you eat the ground beef and any of those prion proteins are present in it and you swallow those. Now, when you guys take Biology 202, you learn that your digestive system is supposed to break down proteins. So these prion proteins you would think would get broken down by your digestive enzymes into their individual amino acids, and then everything would be cool. But no, apparently these prion proteins are able to survive the digestive processes. They get absorbed through the intestinal lining, travel through the blood, then they can enter the brain, and then they can set off basically this chain reaction where they start converting those normal neuron proteins over into the prion form, and it starts to kill neurons throughout the brain. There's also a prion illness that can occur in patients spontaneously, so they don't have to be exposed to prion proteins in order to acquire the illness. And that is called, it's a type of spongiform encephalopathy. It is a prion disease, but it's called CJD for Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease. And so what happens in those patients, all right, so you've got these normal neuron proteins that are being produced in the brain, and those have a gene on DNA that codes for them. Well, in some people, there is a spontaneous mutation in the DNA that results in translation of the prion version. So the normal protein gets converted into the prion version due to a spontaneous genetic mutation, probably occurs in one cell in the brain. And then from there, once you have these prion proteins, they're kind of like zombies. They go around and they find the other normal versions and convert those over to the prion version. And then over time, that can build up and progress and lead to spongiform encephalopathy. So if it occurs spontaneously like that in a patient, and it's not because they've been exposed to prions in any way, then that's called CJD. And that's more likely what you would encounter clinically. You're probably not ever going to have a patient who has mad cow disease, or we hope not. Also, interestingly, prion diseases are more prevalent in, or were more prevalent in cannibalistic societies. So, there have been cannibalistic societies in Papua New Guinea, close to Australia, and prion-type diseases, spongiform encephalopathy, still occurred in those populations on occasion because they were eating human brain tissue. So if there were any even low levels of these prion proteins in the brain of whoever they were eating, that was capable of spreading those prions to the people who had consumed that brain material. So don't eat human brains. Probably not a good idea. All right, so that's just wanted to kind of give you guys a little bit of information there on prions as another non-cellular type of infectious agent. Now, your textbook covers this subject in a little bit more depth, and we're going to focus in just on the prions as the extra non-cellular agent. You'll read about some others in that section of the textbook, but for the purposes of this class and in the interest of time, we're going to just stick to the prions from that section of the textbook. Our last little video clip for Chapter 5 we'll talk a little bit about viruses in human health, and that'll finish up this chapter for us.